I'm sure we are, yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest monthly webinar around digital maturity and all things digital transformation. We'll just give people 1 or 2 more minutes just to join. I'm conscious it's just bang on 2 p.m. here in the UK, so I think we might just give people just a minute or 2 to join. And I can see the participant numbers ticking up, which is good. People are joining, so we'll just hang fire for a second. There we go. Great. Good. Just check where we are with participants. Good. Okay, a few people on. We'll just hang fire 1 minute, and then we'll kick off so everybody gets the at least gets the introduction and the welcome and the introductions. And hopefully it won't get too dark here in the UK. It's still reasonably bright. We're okay. People can see me, hopefully. But as we run past 3 p.m. here in the UK, the gloom descends and all the lights need to come on. So hopefully we'll be all right for the next 45 minutes or so.
The sun is up in Chicago, barely.
Yeah. All right.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Late December.
8 a.m. there?
It's 8 a.m. Yes.
That's not bad.
Not bad.
So we had this way of
Okay.
greeting in the Truman Show. You remember? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are.
That's my life.
Yeah.
Of course, absolutely. So well, we can start with that, can't we? Because that's it's 2 minutes past, so I think we'll start. So yes, so good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our latest Digital Maturity monthly webinar. This is the last one of the year, obviously December. I'm Mark Walker-Smith, head of EMEA for Digitopia. And today, with it being the last one of the year, we're going to be turning our attention really to 2021, to a certain extent, put the 2020 year behind us and look forward into the digital trends, what we see might be happening, the kind of things we might expect as we head into now the new year, including towards the end, what we might call some New Year's resolutions, some things for you to think about, maybe things to even action or certainly consider on your digital journeys as you go forward. I'm delighted today to be joined by a panel of guests who can speak on many and various aspects of this. And so I'll just hand over briefly to the guys to introduce themselves. So Joe, would you like to go first, please?
Thank you, Mark. I am Joe Omani. I'm a professor of management consulting at Cardiff University. I'm an ex-consultant who has been an independent internal and corporate consultant. And now I'm a consultant to the consultant industry. If I say consultant again, you can find me. So I generally focus on growth and innovation for consulting firms and other professional service firms. Up until recently, I've been focused on the large firms, so consulting for IBM, McKinsey and Deloitte and a few others. But I've made a shift recently to small firms that want to grow and usually eventually sell. So that's been my focus of the last 25 years now.
Thank you, Joe. So moving across to Gerod over in Chicago.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm Gerod Carfantan. I'm with Sente. So we're based in Chicago, but we've got offices in Istanbul and London. We run investment programs where we work with private investors like family offices and angels, and multinational corporations where we connect startups through our programs to investment opportunities, early stage investment opportunities, and POCs and pilots with our partners. We think that we've designed a model that can help both serve the needs of startups to get capital and access to customers, and corporations in their digital transformation journey, which I'll speak about a little bit more later. I spent my career about 20 years in the technology industry, both from a business development and engineering and some management consulting. So the concept of digital transformation was always kind of front and center to the work I did before I came over to work with startups.
Excellent. Looking forward to that. And finally, Halil.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Good afternoon and good morning, wherever you are. I'm the co-founder and the managing partner of Digitopia. We consider ourselves as a global expert in digital transformation and especially in digital maturity. And hosting these sessions is a great honor for us. And having these distinguished guests with us is wonderful. Thank you for your time, and thank you for all the attendees and participants taking the time to listening to us. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. We've got quite a bit to cover today because I think we're all keen to talk about, to a certain extent, put 2020 behind us and look forward to bigger and better things, particularly on the in the digital world as we head into 2021. So I thought we would start, Joe, if I can sort of hand to you. Obviously, the consulting and management consultancy sort of sector is certainly your specialism, and really whether you could talk us through some of the trends that you're seeing there and thoughts about how companies are changing and evolving as we head into the new year, really.
Okay, cool. Okay, so the consulting industry has, although you wouldn't believe it from their growth figures in terms of revenue, they've struggled somewhat over the last 20 years in terms of their margins. Margins have been declining. The partnership model has meant that there are more partners chasing smaller margins to pay back their investment. At the same time, competition has increased. There are more competitors, not just from the consulting industry, but from all over, moving into the space. So they've got internal pressure, I guess, to use technology and digital transformation to improve their own internal processes. But at the same time, obviously, consulting is a pull industry, and it is being pulled by client demand. And client demand has obviously shifted from sort of traditional, people management, people transformation, traditional strategy work to digital. Digital transformation now accounts for around 20% of consulting revenue. Technology accounts for another 10%. Cyber is 7%. So it's really, really sizable. And of course, they're the growth markets. If you're looking at where growth is, then I'm talking outside of COVID. I mean, COVID will accelerate some trends. It won't accelerate others, but sort of long term, it's been hit by these. It's been hit by these trends that are shifting its strategy. So what you've seen is big diversification in the large consultancies in terms of what they're doing, especially in digital. If you look at the top 100 or fastest growing consulting firms, around 85% of them are focused on digital. So in some ways, it's a no-brainer. And those tend to be smaller consulting firms. I mean, if you look at the large consulting firms, there are no large consulting firms that don't have significant digital arms. So I guess you can split it into internal and external. So what's happening internally, and at a broad brush level, consultancies have been very good at dealing with the external demand. So obviously, practices around digital innovation, cyber, AI, etc. Less good at actually implementing it successfully. So the more this is a rough rule, but the more trendy the buzzword, the less good they are at actually implementing it. So the failure rates with AI, cyber, machine learning, etc., are still much higher than more traditional things, and that's what you would expect as an industry matures. And on the internal side, as a broad brush at this moment, obviously salaries are a big issue. Consultancies are still paying relatively good salaries for very good people, but they're not just competing with the banks in order to get those people. They're also competing with Facebook, Alphabet, etc. So you know, they're spending a huge amount on these very bright people, and if they can replace them or replace some of them with some automation or some machine learning, then it's going to perhaps improve consistency and visibility for the client, and also save them some headcount costs. So there's these, you've got this external environment, and then you've got the external factors, the sort of client demand, and then you've got the internal factors. The internal factors are where, in my view, most consultancies are lagging behind, actually implementing, you know, doing what they teach in some ways. So that's sort of a broad brush overview of what's happening in the consulting industry. I could talk about that for about 3 days, but I promise I won't.
Well, I think no, that's great, Joe. And I think you know, we're going to sort of cycle back around once Halil and Gerod had you know, their 2 penneth. And I think it'd be, you know, certainly from that sort of internal aspects. I mean, some of those stats that are really interesting. I think it'd be interesting then to look at sort of how consultancies are having to sort of change their operations and the way they work sort of internally to, you know, to best obviously address client expectation, but also, I guess, for optimization and new business models and adapting to the world. So I think we can, we'll come back round to that, I think, if that's okay, in the sort of next round. So I was going to hand over then to Halil, obviously as Digitopia being in the space of digital transformation, particularly the whole digital maturity assessment and benchmarking is really where we are. I wondered if you'd be able to sort of pick up some of the thoughts from Joe and talk a bit more about how we're sort of seeing the world and the outlook moving forward. Hello.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, definitely. So as Joe already described, and COVID just accelerated all this, the world is on a digital journey. We can't ignore that, and it's inevitable with all the technological improvements, from AI to blockchain, from robots to, you know, drones and anything basically. And now with the deployment of 5G, it's becoming connected to the internet and becoming smart and intelligent, and that's good in general. So there are a lot of challenges with that, but it's basically, it's inevitable. And COVID just shown these kind of webinars. We would have preferred to do this in a nice location and would host you and had some drinks and some other facilities, but the whole world now, from, you know, new young children getting in schools with 6-7 years sitting in front of the screens, and people like us, 50-60 year old or even older, now doing their, you know, family meetings and their webinars and their get-togethers, and most of us probably will celebrate Christmas and New Year's Eve even through virtual get-togethers like this one. And this is just one aspect of the digital transformation. Look at what's happening in the retail space. Look at what's happening in the healthcare space, and so it's basically affecting everybody individually and professionally, and every industry. And you have to move along this journey. And we basically, as Joe described, we try to become a digital consulting firm ourselves, and I will talk about our internal transformation in terms of how we are moving our brains basically and our consulting expertise on top of a software platform powered by machine learning and decision trees and rule engines, which we call the Maturity Index platform. And the Digital Maturity Index, which is our flagship service, basically would look at these 6 dimensions and these are existing basically across the industries. Any size of company has customers, does operations, have people inside, uses technology, does some sort of innovation, and definitely needs some portion of governance. And we would scale companies on a scale from 1 to 5, how digital they are. And based on the work we're doing since a few years now, our benchmark total average across all industries moved from 2.7 at the beginning of the year to 2.8 now towards the end of the year. And that's basically our observation, that this is really a very, very long journey. Some companies probably will move faster across this maturity ladder, and some will slower, and that will make all the difference. Tesla surpassed the whole sum of all the automotive industry. The accumulation of all other car makers together is not worth as much as Tesla on its own, and they are just producing a few 100,000 cars. Toyota is producing a few million cars, and Tesla is 3 times more valuable than Toyota. It might be a bubble. That bubble might burst, but at the moment, capital is very cheap for Tesla. Facilities are very cheap for Tesla. He is getting tax incentives all over the place, and that's because they are a software business, and they're putting 4 wheels at their software and calling it cars basically, and mobility as a service, and that will become the future of automotive. And that kind of transformation is happening in many other industries. In the UK, Ocado is probably one of the great winners of the pandemic situation during the COVID time. Many retailers have suffered. They were already prepared for last mile delivery and for online grocery. So they basically are succeeded against many other grocery stores. And we will see similar startups or scale-ups and tech companies overtaking incumbents in many other areas, in banking, insurance, retail, and many other industries. We start seeing now happening it, and I think, and I hope, looking forward, Gerod has many more stories to tell about this. Getting back to you, Mark. You're on mute, Mark.
Sorry, yes, I was on mute. I was listening intently, but on mute. But no, I think that's a very interesting sort of nice segue across into bringing Gerod into the conversation, because from your perspective, Gerod, the kind of work you do out there, particularly, well, you've talked about startups versus big corporates, but digital transformation and that whole sort of innovation piece, I guess, is fundamental to what you guys are doing and how you're interacting with the market. Are you able to give us sort of an overview of what you're doing there and your sort of thoughts on the year as we move forward?
Sure. Yeah. I guess to start, it's hard to separate innovation from digital transformation, right? I mean, we could talk about innovation and whether it's disruptive innovation or sustaining innovation. What we've seen in the work we've done with corporates is most of it has been digital in some way, with the exception of like in the food space, where there's some like new ingredients and changing customer demand shift to, plant-based and that kind of thing. A lot of innovation happened that's not really digital. But on the other hand, in the food space, lots of like, things around digital packaging and engagement with consumers that is digital. So almost all of it, like most of it is digital in some way, digital transformation in some way. And then when so stepping back to innovation, the way we look at it, we know that any corporation has a bunch of tools at their disposal to make progress on their digital transformation or innovation journey. We kind of put it into first two categories. What is best to be done internally, or maybe internally in partnership with consultants, but ultimately they own the delivery and outcome, or what should they look to the outside world? And then where we fit in the outside world is generally things that should be groundbreaking innovation that is not likely to come from a slow-moving, mature corporation, or even come from a scale-up kind of company. It's probably coming from people with really new ideas or new research coming out to the world. So that's the sweet spot for us. I can get to a little bit later. I'll get to like kind of how that links to the digital transformation maturity. But in general, I think what we found this year, for things that were really linked to short-term priorities, such as disruptions in the supply chain or last mile, those kinds of things, those were for companies that were looking for quick wins they couldn't do internally. They were able to catch on and take some risks with startups to make things happen. for things that are a little like that aren't outside their kind of immediate priority list, they've tabled those a little bit, and that's hurt some of the startup ecosystem, because they're like, you know, betting on things that maybe require an economic recovery for these things to really happen. So we're very hopeful that as things kind of open up again, that the startups that we work with, which are generally from very capital efficient geographies and capital efficient business models, will be primed to capture that opportunity. But that's been, I think for some, has been a bit of a struggle if they're not kind of connected to a specific problem, mostly related to COVID-19.
Of course, and I guess that's to be expected if you think it through. But I'm sure that has led to some challenging times for particularly some of those startups.
On the other hand, some like there's those that are doing things with cold chain that are like real-time cold chain monitoring. They're like, if they can just get to those pharma companies and get like, it's hard to experiment with something where people's lives are at stake, but
Yeah.
there's ways to, you know, test things and alongside other mature technologies where they can really kind of capture that opportunity.
Of course. And as you say, I think, you know, we can dive into I think be interesting as we sort of cycle around to dive a bit more into that sort of maturity aspect. I know you mentioned it there in terms of some maturity of the company. Then obviously there's that has direct links to the digital maturity element that you know, myself and Halil would come at it from a Digitopia perspective. Just getting into a little bit more detail, I suppose, in a way. If I cycle back around, Joe, to you, and I know obviously you spoke there earlier on about the changing strategy to a certain extent, and certainly how consultancies are changing. I think one of the things you forward pointed to was that sort of internal change, you know, from an operational perspective. And I know Halil can talk about how that's particularly not affected us, but how we're embracing that at Digitopia, which we can come on to next. But from your perspective, sort of looking at the consulting industry and that kind of internal change or, you know, digitization, shall we say, you know, are you able to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I guess in some ways, the consulting industry has followed the trajectory of most professional service firms, or even just service firms, in terms of, you know, 20 years ago, you know, implementing ERP, moving on to mobile platforms, and having the sort of apps that are useful to both manage knowledge and also manage, you know, project management and all the rest of it. The difficulty they're having is sort of, I guess there's two things. Consultancies tend not to use other consultancies. They tend to use people on the bench for this type of work. Obviously, you know, for very good reasons. And this is why they, you know, very often I will get calls. It's not because I'm necessarily the greatest brain in the world in terms of consultancies. It's because, you know, McKinsey doesn't want to use Bain for this type of thing. Right. So you tend to get relatively independent outsiders helping them with this type of work. But you're getting, you know, everything from AI in terms of sort of data management, data processing, data analytics. I mean, you know what it's like as a junior consultant. You spend a huge amount of your time, you know, collecting, collating, inputting the data, coming up with these, you know, wonderful diagrams. And to some extent, the replacement of that with some form of data analytic capability, whether that's AI or whatever, is starting to change the traditional shape of the traditional consulting firm. So if you imagine the traditional leverage model, you've got, you know, that has changed full stop, simply because you've got these bolt-on businesses that have either been bought or been developed by the consulting firms, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But in addition to that, the traditional consulting leverage model has started to become more of a diamond shape as firms realize that they can, you know, use technology to supplant juniors. With you know, after having got my PhD, I spent my first 2 weeks at the corporate consultancy, you know, doing the photocopying and doing data inputting. I'm really hoping that's not the case anymore. So you've got that on one side. The other side is, where is this innovation coming from? As consultancies have got more commodified, there's less scope for innovation, and certainly clients are noticing this. And a lot of the times I'm called in, it's because clients are saying, well, listen, if we're looking for innovation, we're going to go to the smaller consultancies. And this overlaps with Gerod's work, because what they do is they'll buy, you know, a startup that's grown with something innovative, perhaps a new piece of technology, and they'll buy it, and they'll attempt to incorporate it. But typically, after the founders leave after the earn-out period, you know, the culture changes, the key people leave, and you're left with virtually nothing, or it gets sort of slowly absorbed into the culture of the larger consulting firm. So you've got all of these, you know, significant challenges that consultancies, you know, some consultancies have managed this a lot better than others. I mean, if you look at Accenture's share price over the last 10 years, you know, they're doing very well. They've made that journey very, very successfully. Others are doing less well, and they're struggling. So all of the stuff is happening. You know, if I look at that traditional map, you know, the digital journey, the maturity map, all of those things are happening, but they're not necessarily happening in a way that adds strategic value, which is around innovation.
Right. No, I think that's an interesting insight, and you're right. I think there probably are some companies have sort of embraced this and made it more of their sort of overarching strategy and business model. And I think when we cycle back round, I think, you know, you'll be able to talk a bit more about that. What I'd like to do now is sort of that concept of that sort of digitization internally in terms of operational aspects. I'd like to sort of bring that to life a little bit, really, and hand over to Halil to talk about what we as Digitopia have been doing over the last sort of few years to move in that direction, really. Halil, can I hand to you to talk about that? Oh, I think, are you on mute? Oh.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you.
We all get that, don't we?
Now, what we discovered, and we also have many conversations with Joe on this, and he's helping us a lot in getting our muscles attuned to the digital age, our brains and muscles, let's say. Since we are talking all the time about digital maturity and digital transformation, we thought about what's the future of the consulting business and how can we embrace digital technologies. And this is just a very draft thinking, but it already takes shape. And our first product, basically, which is almost completely digitalized, which is our digital maturity index service, which runs on a cloud-based and massively scalable and data-driven maturity index platform, which provides your maturity scores, some benchmarks, recommendations, and roadmaps for your digital transformation. And our experience with many customers we are running this service, Digital Maturity Index, was following that helping them with these discussions helped them to structure their teams. And this is very natural that you have, you know, people in your team who have various business units, various priorities, various objectives, and various initiatives. And all of them have an interest in doing digital transformation. But we see a huge divergence in corporations among all the energy and all the budget and all the spending and all the human effort put on digital transformation. When we come into these kind of organizations with our Digital Maturity Index service, we help them harmonize and converge towards a shared vision and make them understand this is one company. You should have shared priorities, you should have aligned objectives, and you should have an overall roadmap, basically. And we easily can say that, you know, alignment really accelerates those journeys. And that's one major outcome where we basically, almost without human intervention, we can help in a digital way many companies better understand digital transformation, to assess themselves, to understand where they are, where they want to go, and that they need to work as one team. This is borrowed from John Kotter, basically, from the Harvard Business School, and many people probably know the Leading Change book, and having a shared vision and having a guiding coalition, as he is calling it in his book, are some of his recommendations for successful transformations. The most difficult thing, which we don't mention here because we are afraid of it as well, is the cultural transformation, basically, which goes hand in hand with the technological and with the business model transformation. But that also helps if you have a shared vision and common goals and aligned objectives, aligned priorities. So that's one important benefit we are providing. The outcome, basically, of this benefit then is another one, and that's basically an improvement in financial performance. And since sustainability has become such an important topic for many of our customers, we see that investments in digital transformation also show them that it has a positive impact and a positive side effect on the climate impact. So it's helping companies to reduce their carbon dioxide footprint. So digital transformation delivers true value in that sense. And it's one of our favorite sentences really is that digital transformation is also a team sport, which is what we just were saying on the previous page. So we are very excited about this, actually, to have a software platform, and we reserving dedicated time, the whole team, to convey all the experience and knowledge we have in a structured way into this maturity index platform. So we're building a software, and we're building rules and engines and intellectual property, basically, and put it on the platform and make it available for our customers to use it in the format of a digital maturity index software. And that helps them basically to understand their digital transformation, their digital journey, where they are and where they want to go, and where and how much they need to invest in terms of the various aspects of digital transformation. I hope that makes sense to you, Mark.
Absolutely, and I'm a bit biased. I think it's tremendously exciting. I suppose I am a little bit biased, being on the inside looking out, but hopefully other people will see, the benefits of that, but also the exciting times ahead. And I think that whole concept of a platform where you can effectively hang, multiple maturity models there. Digital maturity is obviously a core flagship for us. But there are various aspects to maturity that can be looked at, and actually the platform can be used to underpin that, which I think is going forward for us as a company. I think is tremendously exciting, and really thinking about that maturity aspect. I'm going to hand back to Gerod again now. You spoke a bit earlier on about the sort of maturity of companies, and particularly that view, I think, Gerod, of how maturity of a company affects their ability to engage with startups and really to make get the most benefit from that kind of relationship that obviously should be beneficial for both sides. And
actually, Halil, I don't know if you have the slides still ready, because the 6 dimensions of digital maturity one. I think I could explain with some examples if you put that up. I was just thinking that, and I think first, it's easy for any corporation to put some marketing money into running a hackathon or going to startup events, but making meaningful things happen that can impact the business and actually impact the startups requires some thinking around digital maturity. So we think sometimes that, like, if we were to find a perfect customer, they would be ready in all of these dimensions, but at that point they're an agile business, they're totally digital, they can probably move as fast themselves as a startup, and I don't even know if they exist, if they're like fully level 5 on all of these, right? But so we we probably don't even want that customer because then they wouldn't need us. On the other hand, if they don't have things like, we talk about things like culture, if there isn't a culture of innovation, if there isn't a culture that's kind of born digital, maybe not born digital, but have been adopted, I guess, digital, then it's really hard to kind of work with those that are born digital, and most startups are born digital. So there's the people element is very important. The governance aspect, if you don't have there's a balance. It makes sense to have a central innovation team to work with because they can be the entry point into the company, but often startups can be blocked at that innovation team and not get access to the business units. So some way of filtering, finding the opportunities and connecting directly with the business units is really important. This goes whether you're engaging with outside startups or internal kind of intrapreneurship. The same is true. If people are coming up with ideas, how do you bring them to different parts of the business? The other example on technology, we've seen this quite a bit, that startups would come with great platforms, great applications that can't really be used yet by the company because they don't even have the required data. If they don't have, say, granular data on their consumers, if they don't know who their customers are, then it's really hard to do things like predictive recommendation engines for those consumers, especially in a brick and mortar context. So on the other hand, if they're a little more advanced, or let me back it up. One of the things of not having that much digital maturity, working with startups can be the spark to make that happen. So it can inspire culture. It can force the initiatives to make technology transformation happen. It can force the organizational initiatives on governance to happen. So we kind of like to, it doesn't necessarily matter so much that you have advanced in your digital maturity, but there's a desire to, and that you understand where you are and what your goals are. And I guess I can summarize it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, excellent. And I think that's that definitely sort of dovetails with what we're seeing, Gerod, in the market and in our customers, that clearly there are some areas of their digital maturity where there are gaps, and part of what we try and do with these companies is not just see where they are today, but where aspirationally they want to get to, and that's probably driven by a number of factors. It will be engaging with that wider sort of innovation community or startups. Clearly they'll have their own corporate goals and specific sort of performance indicators that they want to try and achieve or improve. And you're absolutely right. I think, data is probably, we could all have several webinars about the future of data and how important it's becoming and all of that. So we won't dive into that here because we'll run out of time. But I think it's definitely true to say that the maturity, it spans a number of different sort of facets. It's not just a technological thing. I think the culture is a really important part of it. And certainly, if you look at the customer dimension within our model, customer experience is key, but also that underpinning of customer data, which will drive so many other parts of the maturity model in a way. You're going to struggle to engage with, startups or internal teams that want to really move things forward and be innovative if you don't have that source, fundamentally set of source customer data or whatever the data set is. So the really interesting stuff there. And the trouble with all of this is I think we could talk about all of these for many, many minutes and hours. And I'm going to try and bring it back round to our sort of final topic, really, which is a bit more open and forward thinking. We've sort of called it almost New Year's resolutions. We're almost at the end of the year. Really just sort of coming to each of you to sort of get a bit of a wrap up of what you've talked about and thoughts about moving forward in 2021. So coming to you first, Joe, perhaps, you talked a little bit about changing strategy and how consultancies are certainly changing or wanting to change. Some are perhaps embracing that more than others. Do you want to just sort of summarize and give us your sort of thoughts for the coming year or two?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to split this into larger consultancies and smaller consultancies, which are two different beasts. And smaller consultancies have many of them are seeing their profit margins erode. And what you've seen in the market is sort of the high value stuff is moving away from the lower value stuff, the more commodified stuff that the client could do for themselves but doesn't have the time. And that's where I would say 50% of the small consulting market is. And I would urge them to look at the expertise and the data that they have. And very often that data is hidden away and they don't use it simply because it might be the accumulation of data about their clients or about the projects that they've implemented. All of that data is fascinating and useful and could be used for thought leadership, or could even be used for new products and services. So if you are running or involved with a smaller, ambitious consultancy, staying still is not the answer. Taking a risk. I mean, there's easy wins there. You know, professional service automation software is relatively cheap. It can save you a vast amount of time, reduce your costs, and generate better client experience. So, you know, the risk taking chances is important, and you know this, you know, you're not necessarily gambling the house way. The consulting market has grown, you know, an average 8 to 9%, depending where you are, year on year for the last 100 years, apart from the last year and perhaps 2008 and 2001. So it's not a massive risk. On the larger scale, I think it's obviously a lot more complicated. I think we're going to see some very powerful challenger consultancies coming in and disrupt. Well, they already are disrupting the work of the larger consultancies. There's a consultancy called Elixir, who really, you know, was started I think 9 years ago. Recently floated on the AIM market, and they are really snapping at the heels of the big, you know, McKinsey, Bain, Boston. And their business model is very much around, rather than trying to incorporate, you know, their innovative startup purchases, it's having a house of brands, if you like, where these operate as individual companies and support each other, and Elixir provide the back end. So I think there's going to be, I think our eyes should be focused on some of the challengers. Obviously, the large brands still have their brands, and that's worked for them for 100 years and will continue to work for them. But I think there's almost an over-reliance on the traditional consulting model. And of course, they are experimenting, sort of, you know, Gerod mentioned Boston's Digital Ventures, there's Bain's Prism, there's the Gamma team at Boston. And all of this stuff is happening. The key thing is it making the margins? And
Right.
very often I think it's not making the margins because there's still that core culture of, you know, doing hoping the traditional consulting model is coming back. I'm almost reminded of the record industry when Napster emerged, you know, sort of holding on to the sinking ship. So I would hope the large consultancies would start to look more seriously at central cultural change and shifts in their business model.
So excellent. Yes, I think some quite sort of you know, good insights there into how things are changing and perhaps will continue, or even in some ways accelerate, which I think is interesting. Gerod, sort of coming back around to you just for a sort of final sum up, really, and you know, we're all hoping that there is this upturn. You know, we all come out of COVID and you know, there will be an upturn, and you talked about sort of startups and certain sort of innovation hubs and whatever that are probably almost waiting for, you know, for the button to be pressed. Do you want to just sort of give us your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, well, first, I think there's going to be winners and losers that come out of this, right? And I don't think just conserving cash and waiting for a recovery, whether you're a startup or you're a corporation, I don't think that's the answer. I think you need to kind of bet on a future for your industry and position yourself for that future. And from the corporation's perspective, it's very likely that future will be a disruption that's coming from outside your industry. So it's good to look outside your business to see who you can partner with, so you can kind of be ready for that. But yeah, I think it's a lot about trying to make a bet on what that future is going to be, and each industry is going to be different. Some will be radically different. Some will just return to normal.
Yeah, I think, yes, and I think none of us thought we'd be here in December still not really knowing. I think we all sort of thought by the end of the year we would have come out and we'd know a little bit more about the shape of 2021. Just sort of coming back to you, Halil, really to sort of finish off. I know our research team did some work back in the summer, really, probably when we thought the pandemic was only a few more months to run, around what we call the better normal, and trying to look at, a bit reflective on how things have changed during the early days and months of the pandemic, but then really trying to look forward to hopefully what will be a better normal, not just a new normal, but a better normal. Do you want to sort of give us your sort of sign-off views there and the outlook for maturity and those kind of things?
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, well, we think that it swung back the COVID pandemic changed our lives severely, but it will not stay the same. We will not go back to the previous normal, most probably. So we will establish a new normal, what we call the better normal. So it will be a hybrid version of the old world and the new world, probably, because there are some lessons what we are learning during this pandemic, and we can do many things differently and much more things digitally. And that's basically where we are focusing on, to help organizations use digital technologies and digital transformation as wise as possible. So and to really identify the most important issues and the most important challenges for you. We truly believe that knowing your digital score, your digital maturity score, is the first step to do. And all engineers among our listeners know that you basically manage and improve what you can measure. So knowing your score in a very precise, detailed manner will help you to improve your digital capabilities. Defining your targets and defining your targets as a organization, as a company, as a leadership team will help you for alignment, and that alignment will accelerate your digital transformation. There's enough evidence and examples we have experienced, and it's also written a lot on that shared goals and vision. I just was referring back to John Cotter and his experiences, and that will help you to ignite basically your journey. So that's our New Year resolutions, kind of, and I'm sure there will be interesting questions from our participants, and happy to answer those questions.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you there for sort of summarising your thoughts there and views for the year ahead. We've just got a couple of minutes for Q&A. We've got a couple of questions have come in, which I will just have a quick look at. So somebody has posed, this is an interesting one. I don't know who to throw this one to. What forms of digital investment are the most risky, and what are the moonshots? And is the risk worthwhile? So I don't know who wants to take that one really about, I don't know, maybe Gerod, from a investment point of view, you talked about people betting on, the what might be changing or coming up. What do you see being the ones that are sort of perhaps most risky or perhaps safer bets from here?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I think the things that are probably the payoff is greater where the risks are bigger, right? Possibly one that I'm very skeptical about is MicroStrategy putting millions of dollars into Bitcoin in their treasury. I don't know really the strategy there, rather than actually, if they're a software company, you should be investing in your product, right? That delivers something that customers love. So it's one thing to do something risky. It's another thing to do something risky that's completely not aligned with your customers or the value proposition you're trying to deliver to the world.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to pitch in on that one?
I can only talk to, you know, what clients say, the client feedback that the surveys show from different digital implementations, and the closer you get to the core bread and butter, as I said before, sort of standard digital transformation, you know, process automation, that type of stuff, the safer it is. What's interesting is the general feedback about higher risk implementations such as AI or cyber is that the failure rates as a rule are significantly higher. But where it does work, it works very, very well. So when AI, in fact, Gerod would know more about this than me, but it seems to me that when AI investments really pay off, they can pay off very significantly. I have a good friend who's working on AI automation of document reading for a very large client, and the project's saving them, you know, tens of millions off an investment of, you know, sort of $1 million or $2 million. So when it does pay off, it pays off very well. But a lot of this is down to the clients. You know, clients, this type of stuff is getting the good advice. It's spending enough time on the strategy and really understanding the business opportunities, which is traditional challenge, rather than jumping straight into a solution because it sounds sexy.
I think that's yeah, very, very true, and yes, a very interesting answer to that question. I'm just sort of looking and conscious of time. We've had just one more pop in. It's probably one, actually it's a two-part question that's come in that I think is probably for Halil and probably one that I can take offline as well. So it's a question about our digital maturity assessment. What makes it different from others in the market that, you know, are available from other, you know, other outlets are available. Although I would say, and I think Halil can help us here, that not all digital maturity assessments are the same. So that's first part, and then second one about, which I think you probably talked a little bit about, Halil. Is that maturity assessment a one-time activity or done during the start of the journey, or should it be continuous? I think, you know, I think we know the answer to that, but do you want to just cover those off very, very briefly, really? And yes. What I would say is, if that person wants to reach out to me afterwards for you know, a bit more of an involved conversation, I'd be very happy to do that, because there's quite a lot to that answer, I think. But absolutely. In summary, Halil, are you okay to take that?
Sure,
one?
thank you. Yeah, well, we've done a competitive analysis and looked into what's available in the market, and we've experienced more than 20 years, and combining all the knowledge in the company, it's more than 100 years of consulting experience with various maturity models from the industry, and we comprised and harmonized and, you know, aggregated all our experience into one very holistic, comprehensive maturity model, which is probably the most holistic, industry agnostic, completely objective and independent one. So that basically sets us apart. It's very pragmatic in the way it is being used, and it delivers very, very precise recommendations how to progress on that maturity. The second question is a very important one and a very good one. Yes, it's not a one-time activity, it's a continuous activity. We recommend at the moment an annual maturity assessment. So you see on an annual basis how much you're progressing. We do quarterly reviews with our customers and help them to ensure that they stay on track, basically. For some of the companies, we already also have a program and change management capability, helping them really managing their digital transformation journeys. But as you said, this is really very important questions, very important points. And for many of the consulting firms, and I think Joe can you know, validate that information, digital maturity and assessments are just a door opener for most of the big consulting firms. At least for us, it's our core business. So we are very focused and determined. We don't have downstream commercial interests in selling other consulting services to the companies, and that makes us quite unique and quite distinguished from all the other usual suspects.
Can I just follow up that up with that? If you're paying somebody that has a solution to your digital ills, and you're asking them to do a maturity or benchmarking service, you can predict what the answer is going to be.
Yes.
Yes, I think there's an awful lot to that. I would totally agree with that, and that's probably another webinar in its own right. I put my email address there in the chat. So if the person that asked those questions, which are very, very good questions, and the kind of questions we can talk about for many hours if we need to, but if that person wants to follow up with me, I'd be very happy to schedule a call and we can go into it in a bit more detail, because clearly there's an interest there in what we're doing, and I'd be very happy to do that. It just remains for me to thank all of our guest speakers today. Thank you ever so much to Joe, to Gerod, to Halil. You can contact the guys if there's anything that they've been talking about that's of interest. I'm sure you can contact them via their LinkedIn profiles, which are accessible within the invite and the LinkedIn posts around this webinar. So you can reach out to the guys. You can get to me either via LinkedIn or obviously on that email. And just to say thank you to everybody who's attended. And if anybody's been on several of these now, you should know we'll be hopefully continuing these into the new year on a monthly basis is the intention. And thank you again to the speakers and to everybody out there, and wishing you all happy holidays and a very happy and prosperous new year. Thank you to you all.
Thank you to our moderator,
Thank you,
Mark.
Thank you, Gerod. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Thanks again.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.